Okay, hello everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining. This is our second panel of 4 panels for our virtual thesis show 2020 at the MFA Design for Social Innovation program at School of Visual Arts. I'm Mia Osaki and I'm chair of DSI. I go by she, her pronouns. We're incredibly excited for our next panel on race, gender, equity, inclusion, moderated by the fantastic Rasmia Kirmani Frye, founder of the Fund for Public Housing and a native New Yorker. For those of you who are just joining us today, Design for Social Innovation is one of the first MFA programs that teaches social design. Our students are social designers who boldly take on tough systemic problems. They care about climate change, race, gender equity, education, our government's technology, and the impact on our world today. Their projects, as you'll see today, our graduating class is here to share their work that's required them to work creatively with communities and industry partners out in the real world to collaborate on more sustainable and equitable responses. And that's what we teach at DSI. We're in a whole new world today. And as you see, the graduating students co-created these panels because they wanted to engage back with the communities. They wanted to be able to reach out and start these conversations and really look towards the next future. These students, I'm so proud of them. Congratulations to you all graduating. You are resilient, you care, you connect, you're vocal, you advocate. And you'll see a lot of that happening today. The second panel theme is on race, gender, equity, inclusion. And I just want to pause and say our thoughts go out to those who have been impacted with COVID, our frontline healthcare workers, our essential workers, those that are impacted by health disparities, microaggressions, and acts of racism and discrimination that are happening in the news every day. So here we are, and you'll find that there is, despite all the news today, there is a lot of hope, and we have a lot of hope for the future. So the format for our panel today is we'll do 10 minutes of introduction with Raz, our moderator, and our graduating students. We'll do 25 minutes of panel discussion where students will talk about the theme and how it impacts their work and their perspectives on the topic. And then about 12 o'clock, we will field some questions from the audience. So all of you know Zoom. There's a button at the bottom that says Q&A, and we'll prompt you for them. But you're welcome to submit questions as we go. And then we'll do 5 minutes of closing statements. And that'll be the end of our day 1 panels. And then we start tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. for our day 2 panels. If you want to know more about our amazing students, we have a special website. It's dsa.sva.edu/thesis2020. It'll be in the chat, and we have a hashtag DSI Thesis 2020. The graduate students spend 3 semesters working on their projects, and we dedicate 3 semesters because it takes that long to do this social impact work. And they do this with the help of their thesis advisors, who are mentors, really. Jeff Franklin, Mari Nakano, Esther Kang, Allison Cornyn, Natalia Ratterwall, Archie Lee Coates IV. And this year we have a new thesis advisor, Kara Meyer, and she really made a big splash on this thesis show. She helped the students, she helped to come up with some of these collaborations. And she not only jumped in to shape the panels with the students, but she immediately said, I know exactly who you need to get to moderate one of your panels. So I'm honored to introduce Rasmia Kirmani Frye. We hope that you will be in our DSI family forever. And I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you so much, Mia. And students and audience, welcome. It's really, really my honor to be here with you all today. I think audience, as you will soon hear, the work of these students is incredibly timely, relevant, thoughtful, creative, and quite frankly, pretty mind-blowing what they have done. So I've been asked first to just share a little bit about myself. I am currently, or as Mia said, I founded an organization called the Fund for Public Housing, and I'll talk about that in a second. I started my career in New York over 25 years ago at the then very fledgling Times Square Business Improvement District, where I don't think we ever thought that Times Square,
Oops. I think we just lost Raz. Oh, there you are.
I don't know what happened. Sorry.
No problem.
I don't think we ever thought that Times Square would look the way it looks now. And maybe somebody would describe it as kind of like extreme social design and transformation. After that, I went to graduate school, not too far from SVA at the New School, where got my master's in urban and public policy and was in the doctoral program, and was really in the writing the final chapters of my dissertation when I got a phone call. I'd also been a community organizer in Brooklyn for a long time, that there was a new project starting in Brownsville, Brooklyn. Brownsville is a place that I've loved for a really long time. And so I'm not suggesting anyone else do this. I stopped writing my dissertation and headed out to Brownsville. I'm still ABD, and that's okay. And spent 10 years in Brownsville, Brooklyn, working with residents on a bunch of things, but really, what is collective impact? How can residents be centered in coming up with solutions and lifting up a narrative that's true to them? I think much of my work in my career has been about dispelling the dominant narrative of communities and of people, and particularly people of color, where so often those narratives are authored by other folks. After being in Brownsville, I kind of did the unthinkable to many, although I asked permission from my Brownsville family if it would be okay if I did this. And I joined the executive team at the New York City Housing Authority. And there I ran the Office of Public-Private Partnerships, where my job was really to help NYCHA partner better with both likely and unlikely folks throughout the city and kind of deal with its own narrative, I think, and this is my just 10 seconds on public housing, that in New York City, we value lots of systems with the word public in front of it. Like, even if you hate kids, you think public education is a good thing, public art, public parks, public libraries, public transportation, which we love to hate, but people do not value public housing the same way they value those other systems. Even though the top 3 employers of public housing residents in New York are the Department of Education, the New York Police Department, and NYCHA itself. Many of our frontline workers right now are public housing residents. So as we think about who is determining who is valued, and determining social design and what that looks like and what that feels like, certainly public housing is a big piece of the discussion. So I will stop there because I was very long in our rehearsal. And now I'm happy to open it up to our students and have them introduce themselves. And we'll start with Aditi and Kartik.
Thanks, Rasmia. Hello, everyone. I'm Aditi. Preferred pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a communication designer and now a social design learner from India. And with the skills and capacities that I've gained at DSI over the last year, I hope to be able to design better, more resilient and inclusive systems for a more equitable future.
Hello to everyone who's watching. Hope you all are staying safe and well during this strange moment in time. I'm Kartik. My preferred pronouns are he, him, his. I'm a social and strategic designer from Mumbai, India. Aditi and I are thesis partners. So through our project, Unfair, we aim to understand the dissonance in the Indian culture with dark skin and how might we enable the creation of healthy, positive, and radically inclusive narratives surrounding skin color in India.
India has had a long history of prejudice against dark skin, and this prejudice, or as it's often called, colorism, manifests in many different spaces. But through our research, Kartik and I realized quickly that it's overwhelmingly prominent in the Indian media, right from children's content like textbooks or cartoons to Bollywood films and advertisements. And this repeated portrayal of fair skin superior to dark skin has conditioned to think negatively about dark skin.
So our intervention was geared at reimagining this age-old narrative, and our approach included first educating future designers and creators who would be the image makers of tomorrow to weave inclusivity into their design practice. Number two, co-creating ways to bring inclusivity in current media narratives with folks from the creative industry. And third, spreading awareness on a larger scale through social media by providing commentary on negative as well as positive portrayals of skin color in Indian advertising. Thank you.
Awesome. Hello, everybody. My name is Damian, and my preferred gender pronouns are he and him. And I arrived at DSI with a background in marketing and content strategy, as well as a history in social and educational social justice activism. Yeah, being at DSI has been a place to really kind of connect those two disparate backgrounds. For my thesis project, I created the Healthy Masculinity Forum, a place for men to come together and talk about what it means to be a healthy man. And I know in the last few years, in light of the Me Too movement, this term such as toxic masculinity has really come out to describe sort of what I term unhealthy masculinity. And from what we know, the idea of what it means to be a man is a social construct, and a lot of the pressures that men experience to perform these types of masculine traditional attributes really have some harmful consequences both on men, women, and society. And so the Healthy Masculinity Forum is that place for men to come together and talk with each other about what it means to be healthy in our masculinity.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Lorena, and I use she, her, and ella pronouns. And I'm first generation Dominican-American woman. I was born and raised in Northern New Jersey. And I'm also an artist, educator, and facilitator, comadre, sister, friend. And I come into DSI with a background in nonprofit and youth development work, and also more broadly, like the anti-violence against women and girls movement. And so my project is called Youth Action Lab, and it's an educational program that works with middle schoolers and uses storytelling and creative expression to explore and talk about questions around race and identity. And I was super lucky to partner with Washington Heights Expeditionary Learning Schools, or WHEELS, it's a mouthful. And so WHEELS is a predominantly Latinx K through 12 school, public school in Washington Heights. And it was really awesome to work with community that I shared an identity with. And so a lot of, my thesis really thinks about is how do we really root young people of color in their power and agency and ability to both like have the tools to explore who they are, but also language and know their history so that they're better able to not only navigate racist systems, but resist and thrive despite those systems. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ryana, and my pronouns are she, her. I'm a multidisciplinary designer, strategist, and artist. And I've been working over the last year building a community called Storied Lives, which is an intentional space for Black folks to investigate, create, and share their personal and familial narratives and stories. And our mission with this project is to facilitate conversation and creative practice that can lead to generational healing. And over the last year, I've co-designed and conducted workshops as well as individual and group projects with my community, and have begun curating a community of sharing via social media as well. And most recently, I'm collecting digital art pieces for a community quilt, which you can check out on storylives.org. And through my research, design, interventions, and my own lived experience, I found that creative practice can really be a powerful tool for healing. And so my work is focused on encouraging and creating space for my community to embrace creativity and storytelling to facilitate ongoing conversations and practices related to generational healing.
Hi everyone, I'm Vanessa and my preferred pronouns are she and her. So for the past year, I've been working on the topic of trying to address the lack of socioeconomic and racial disparity in the creative sector, and specifically focusing on the barriers that low-income immigrant communities face whilst trying to obtain occupations in the creative sector. I have been working with a Harlem-based organization called Custom Collaborative to create a data collection toolkit that tries to highlight and demonstrate the impact of their work in creating more access for low-income immigrant women specifically into the fashion sector.
Hi, I'm Xuan, and my pronouns is she, her. And through the last year, I was working on the sexual objectification of female representations in mainstream superhero comics. And I'm collaborating with illustration students and to work on that problem. So my main intervention is explore how to improve the understanding of female depictions by male comic artists to create more positive female representations in their work. So my main intervention is through using game to open dialogues about gender and bodies, and at that conversation we kind of brainstorm and create some challenges for male artists to challenge their own personal bias and throw them into yearly check-in postcards. So through that we establish a stewardship between the male artists and their female friends, and that helped their and that's not only help open a dialogue but also help to help towards a better future.
Great. So thank you all. I hope the audience, you feel this kind of combination of this like fierce hope and radical optimism that I think is embodied in every single one of these projects, because this is not like tackling some small issue. We are talking about race, gender, equity, and inclusion. And I think to be able to approach that in a creative way with this kind of burning patience that society feels with these issues, that's a phrase that Pablo Neruda uses, used in his Nobel Prize acceptance speech, this burning patience that we've been kind of waiting, I think particularly for this field, to approach and center race, gender, equity, and inclusion. And so you all, your work is exceptional, it's thoughtful, it's moving, it's I said it before in my intro, it's mind-blowing. And so, you know, I think over the last few years as a society, we've heard the terms race, gender, equity, and inclusion a lot more than we did like 20 years ago. But often when that happens, when an issue becomes mainstreamed, is that it also becomes mainstreamed, which means that it moves from being something that is controversial, filled with good tension, it becomes something rote and box checking. And so there are many, many corporations, organizations, even people who are like, oh yeah, we do race, gender, equity, inclusion. And you've probably heard people talk about it like that. And they can check a box and kind of move on. And so in social design and social innovation and the work that you do, my question is, and that work that leads to systems change, which you all in some way are talking about, how do you keep race, gender, equity, and inclusion at the center of that work so that it does not become box checking? How do you do that? How do you think about that in your work? And then as you move forward in your careers, how do you think about how to do that? Damian, why don't we start with you and then we'll move it around.
Sure, awesome. Thank you, Rasmia. And yeah, I mean, I think it's a really difficult or complicated question, but I think that there's some really amazing tools and resources as designers that we are able to really pull, and at least through this program, have learned. I think that, one of the central questions, at least through the work that I've done, is how, especially when working in and around power as men that we are in positions in, how do we address and think about this? And I think that both through the work that I did with my 2 community partners, 2 healthy masculinity-based discussion groups, I think one of the central questions that we were constantly reflecting on is just, where is it that power exists within us? And I think that idea of power is a really significant entry point into thinking about the work that we do as designers, because there is not just there's not just simply like an equitable dynamic necessarily. I think that when thinking about, especially to the research we do, how do we come to realize and understand, how do we gain the knowledge that communities need? And this question of epistemology, I think, is really wonderful, because when we draw from, I think, critical theory, when we think about disrupting historic paradigms of power, we can leverage, critical ethnography, where we as designers are constantly reflecting on our own positionality, using reflexivity to reflect on the ways in which we are engaging in the research that we're doing, what biases we have within ourselves, how that is informing how we're working with communities. And then I think secondly, critical pedagogy is such a powerful tool as well to reflect on as we are thinking about developing tools around praxis, when we are iterating through our co-creation processes, and that in fact we are, engaging in actual community development and co-creation in that equitable way that empowers individuals.
Yeah, I can jump. Sure, I can jump in.
Awesome.
Yeah, I was gonna kind of to tag on to that. I think it's super important to put a really strong emphasis on co-designing with communities, because equity and inclusion really have become buzzwords, especially in sort of the corporate space. And so a lot of organizations will kind of claim to focus on those things without really engaging the people that are supposed to be benefiting from those systems. And that lack of engagement and co-creation can actually ultimately cause more harm than good. And so like with my work, I've this kind of co-creation, co-design practice has manifested as a lot of close working sessions with the community, where all voices at the table are uplifted, and carefully crafting sort of questions that we're asking, the conversations that we're having, in order to engage people in ways that the community is telling us that they need, as opposed to us going in with our kind of education and sort of ivory tower research, and really kind of creating those spaces for co-design to happen. And for true equity and inclusion work to happen and be sustained, we really have to invest in collaborating and co-creating with the people who represent true diversity, and not just those kind of like check boxes of like, yes, we have X number of, this type of person. But co-design is really important.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And what came up for me is like, any anti-oppression work, and if you're working in any movement, right, it's about practice. And so thinking about how we dismantle these systems it's not a checkbox, right? It's something we have to constantly do in our everyday lives. And it starts with us and our own personal interrogations around, where does racism show up for me in my life, in my body, right? And thinking about within the educational system, and there's been a lot of initiatives in public school, and our chancellor's really championing anti-bias, more equity, anti-racist work. And there's a lot of barriers to that. There's a lot of resistance. Talking about race and naming race is still very taboo within our educational school system. And the folks who are predominantly impacted are Black and Brown, right? Which are like over 80% of our school system. And so the people who are impacted know this is happening. And so really having this more fluent conversation with folks that, it's okay to talk about race. It's okay to acknowledge like it shows up and it's embedded in all of our systems, and our systems are this way because of the ways that racism really operates and devalues folks, right? Especially Black and Brown bodies. And we're seeing that right now with COVID. So yeah, I think about this idea of practice, and that it's hard work, and that it's deep commitment. It's not just one training, it's ongoing conversations, not just looking at the numbers, and just like really thinking about what is the impact of like how we're showing up for our students. And so yeah, I'll get into more the system of it, but I think the first thing that comes up is its practice. It's being really diligent and committed and about this work, and that it takes more than one person.
Yeah, I think this is a really important question, and so thank you for the question. I think one of the great things about the program at DSI is the emphasis placed on letting the community we work with envision the future state that they want to see, and then working with them to make that a reality. So I feel like if you involve your community in your process and they are at the table with you, you end up designing with them and not for them, and that prevents it just being like a checkbox solution.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think that one of the things that Kartik and I really thought about with our project was that what does inclusivity mean to us? And when we are going in and asking people to think about inclusivity and buy and take this and how it shows up in their work, like what does it mean for us, and are we just going to go at them and say this is what inclusivity means? So I think a lot of it for us was to build the capacity to have them, to give them the capacity to be able to think about this and to be able to bring diversity or inclusivity in their work, rather than us designing at them and saying you need to be inclusive or this is how you make diverse work. So yeah, I think capacity building is definitely one of the important bits for me.
Vanessa?
Yeah, so I completely agree with what everyone has said. And specifically, I think that we have to think that, you know, our solutions, it's not a Band-Aid, a quick fix. It has to come from the people themselves, and that most of the time, actually, people do know what they need and the solution to the problem, actually. So I think that it's really important to work with the people instead of designing for them, as Kartik said.
And Xuan?
Yeah, I think community, yeah, of course, we have to work with the community and realize that they know the answer to the problem, but also we need to realize the power in that power dynamic in that community. So for me, I'm working with a community that's like male dominant, and so it's, the thing is important. It's for them. It's more like a checkboxing indeed, and so how can I convince them that this is important? So my I think the importance is like you have to realize there is the existing relationship and dynamic in that community, and you have to build your solution based on that relationships. Like I'm working on the problem that's like helping male artists, but how can I help them? It's not me helping them, it's their their female friends helping them. So kind of advocate that, no, kind of elevate that relationship is the key elements in my project. So.
And you've all of you have mentioned, if not by name, certainly by example, a few things: power, representation, co-design, which is related to those things, that communities have the answers. And I think that is so true. So often we ask communities of whatever kind to do two things. One, to continuously redefine the problem, and also which that indicates in a power representation dynamic that in some way they are the problem. And two, don't really ask communities, and however we're defining that, what the solution is. And what I see in all of your work is that you are doing elements of that, of inclusiveness, representation, really recognizing that communities have the solutions themselves. And so my question is, how do you, as designers, when there is that tension, that power tension, that definitional tension, right? You're getting out of pedagogy, getting out of academic language, which can be in itself oppressive. How do you hold on to that tension as good tension to move through as opposed to just like pushing it aside. So how do you as designers and social innovators hold that tension and move through the tension so that at the end of it, you are inviting co-design? What, can you talk a little bit about that? And why don't we start with Ryana?
Sure, yeah. I think a lot of my project has been around tension generally, whether that's tension between generations or tension between individuals and their environments, or between individuals and themselves. And so a lot of my research has really been focused on the idea that, that lived experience is really the most important data set that we can address and should really be used on kind of the level of any other scientific measure. That lived experience is really an important piece of story and narrative, and kind of alleviating some of the tension that we see between the ways that we interact with the world. And that, you know, narrative specifically in story is really what propels us to action, and what might also keep us stagnant in certain situations. And so at the end of the day, you know, we perceive, everything that we perceive and understand about our world comes down to story and the stories that we tell. So with my work, kind of by intentionally creating ways for individuals to engage with narrative, we're able to really expose how interconnected we all are. And then we see that our stories are inextricably linked to the stories of others. And we often see this in workshops where, you know, someone will share a story and everyone will be like, oh yeah, like nodding along, which seems like a really small gesture, but it actually signifies how much of our stories are connected because of the systems that we inhabit. And so with that as a foundation, we can kind of envision systemic change based on narrative, which I think helps to address some of the tensions that we see, because we're kind of creating this through line of story and narrative that people can follow along with.
Agreeing to what Ryana said, and I think the piece that you said about interconnectedness and our stories being connected, I think that was part of the tension for me and Kartik, where there's really nobody to blame when it comes to like a really systemic issue like colorism. Like you can't really say you started this or somebody else started this. We've all done it in some form or the other. And I think a large part of it for us was to reconcile that we are two relatively fair people trying to work on the issue of colorism, and how are we showing up in these spaces. And also in like our tone of voice needed to be more, what can we do about this, rather than blaming somebody or trying to point fingers or trying to kind of like, yeah. So I think both of us really wanted to be intentional in making space for people to grow and change this narrative around skin color, rather than blame them for having repeated this over the years.
Thank you. What came up for me around this question is trust, especially working with young people within a school. Like, we see all the examples around hierarchy and power, and there's a principal and a senior teacher and a junior teacher. So for me, I was hearing a lot, you know, because I was building relationships with the educators in the building and hearing a lot about what they were seeing as problems or issues that young people were facing. And so I was like, let me just talk to the young people. And when I talked to young people, they were existing and like voicing all of these tensions that they were living with, you know, and navigating through within their school building. And so often I kept thinking, like, how do we trust young people? And how do we, like, when they tell us what they need, how do we actually show up and deliver the programming and the resources that they need? And so I kept coming back to that piece around, you know, young people are often the object, like being put upon all these rules and expectations, and they're expected to perform in all these ways. And what are they actually telling us about what that feels like for them, and how they're, you know, like, what do they want to see change? And so I started talking with folks, because my school was K through 12, when I talked to seniors about what they envisioned for the conversations that they wish they had around race and identity for middle school. And they had beautiful things to say. And that was really like the inspiration for this project, is trusting those, you know, the older folks in the building, and then talking to middle schoolers. And so, yeah, just also like getting adults to trust that young people are, what they're saying is valid and true. And for me is like validating that through the stories that they were sharing with me. And so just tells us a lot about how our public school system doesn't trust young people, and very often is trusting people who don't look like them or don't even live in their own communities to make decisions for them.
Yes, speaking of trust, I feel so much more like about trust in this project. Is like so for Lorena, her is like giving that trust to teenagers. For me, it's like how can we earn trust from the male these male artists, since they are just like 92% of the industry is male, and you have to earn trust and you have to build that relationship with them so that we can make the real dialogues and the progress. So and also thinking of other things that's inviting them. The question, the topic around female representation just became very scary for a male to talk about in these days, and so it's not just about trust you. They have to trust you about like the safety, that we are safe to talk about this project, and we have some interest in talking about this project, or you have to like just incentivize their interest around this topic. So for me, it's really about like building that relationship with male artists through their female friends. So they think that, okay, the topic is so big and it's not that related to me. For me, it's like I'm just making money through making illustration. But if the thing is related to their female friends, the thing, it become more visible for them and more urgent, so they have that interest. And also because their friends are present when we are doing all these like dialogues and conversation, so they feel like safer to talk about the things. So I think that yes, trust and that sense of safety is really important.
Yeah, and I think it's also about like creating new narratives that helps us imagine new possibilities and also begin to reframe the narratives of our dominant culture and systems, and also beliefs and behaviors. And it's the spread of this new narrative and having a collective adoption that could then enable us to begin shifting and shaping the culture and these dominant systems.
So, like when we were initially working with this project, Aditi and I were first examining how, at a very early age, people get conditioned to start perceiving dark skin to be something negative. And so we were focusing our research on working with school-going children, but we quickly heard from people and also on reading accounts of a lady who was saying that she raised her daughter, who was also dark skinned, to be someone who always was told that dark skin is something to be proud of and it's not something to be ashamed about. And once that child went to school, there was an experience where there was another child who was also dark skinned, and this girl refused to play with her. And at that point of time, the mother realized that it's not just what the kid learns at home, but it's also what the kid is exposed to right outside this house, in the media, etc. So that was our first pivot point of learning from the community, and then like taking a new approach. And similarly, when we were focusing our efforts with our first intervention, which was like a couple of workshops with design students, we heard from them that they are thinking about this issue, but since there isn't enough representation, they don't see good examples of how to do this kind of work. And that led us to think about our third intervention, which was to co-create a set of guidelines per se for these students to use. And we co-created this along with people who are right now working in the industry. Thank you.
Yeah, and just to add to so many awesome points that were just mentioned, you know, for me, such an important aspect is just the role of community. We're stepping into communities as designers, and there's language, there's culture, and that we're participants in that community, and the role of trust is so crucial, both through how we show up with consistency, with accountability, and our participation. And I think there's also this element of that reflexivity, of that self-awareness to also reflect and be accountable as to whether or not, you know, we're also the right community partners or participants, and sometimes maybe we're not the best suited to step in and participate in those communities.
Thank you all. I think that's a really important point to end before we're going to move to questions from the audience, but really knowing when to step up and to step back, and having that awareness that the most gracious participatory thing that you can do is to take a seat. And that is a really important and can be hard to know, but that alone can build so much trust as an action. It's an action. Being silent, knowing when to step back is an action. And I would add too, and if I had a third question, it would be about this, is that it is okay and important to bring joy to the work, and laughter and love and touch. And I think when we hear topics like gender, race, equity, inclusion, we get our very serious, deep faces on, and that's really important. But to know that in social innovation and social design, joy is part of discovery and is also part of tension. So I just want to say that in general, and I'm going to move on to some questions that we have posted from folks. So, and we'll just popcorn this. If you feel moved to speak, please do. The first question is, what is the mechanism for translating social designs into actionable policy change? Let me say that again. It's a deep one, right? What is the mechanism for translating social designs into actionable policy change?
I can start
Sure.
on this one. Obviously, a very difficult question. I think the initial mechanism is kind of building understanding about what those policy systems are and what they look like, and what our role as citizens are in that system. I think one of the things that I've seen through a lot of projects that I've worked on at DSI, and with a lot of the communities that we work with, is like there's really kind of a lack of understanding about how some of these systems even work. And I think that's because they're obviously so huge and complex. And so how can we start to distill some of that down and help people to understand the mechanics of the system? And especially from a policy perspective, I think a lot of that comes down to movement building, community organizing, being able to really, get people from the ground up to understand the systems and understand that they're involved systems, and that their part in those systems is really important. So yeah, sorry, my puppy's like crying in the background.
Yeah, just want to tack on to what Ryana said. I think we need to understand that social change and design for social change has been happening for a really long time. It's just being done using different words. And we've all seen people's movements getting into getting into a position where it could actually lead to policy building and asking for policies to change. Something close to our project happened in India a few years ago, when a lot of people joined this movement led by a team where they were championing having a ban of sorts on commercials that show dark skin in negative light, which eventually led to policy change on a government level. So I think it's possible, as just like Ryana said, we just have to build the community out there to voice their opinion. And that's how it's done.
Yeah, and just to add an additional note, I think one of the things that, or at least the connection between design and policy, I think there's so much opportunity and also a lot of challenges when taking, at least with design, qualitative data and research, and then trying to make a case as to why these design interventions should move forward, compared to quantitative data, which I think for so many folks, whether it's in government or I think within product or industry, have traditionally been such the more reliable metrics to, I think, gauge value. And so I think we're at a really exciting time now when there is an abundance of social design opportunities to think about how it is that we are able to make a case for the qualitative research. And I think that's where, especially to the praxis and the iteration, becomes so valuable, because we are able to leverage the qualitative data, the research that we're doing, see what's working, what isn't, based on the co-creation process. And then through that, scope and scale. I think being in New York, we're in a really exciting place where I think we have a local government that is really interested in more dynamic approaches to policy, leveraging more social design. But I think, yeah, we have an abundance of opportunity moving forward and ahead.
Just want to add, I think to me, an important piece here is the ownership bit. Like if the communities that we're working with are able to envision their end goal they really want to work towards, I think if they have ownership of that, then you can give them a call to action as to ask for policy change. But yeah, I think it's really important that they believe that this change is required, so that they can then ask for the change, because it's not going to be one or two social designers who can change policy. It has to be a lot of citizen action and a lot of, as Kartik said, it has to be a people movement. So yeah, I think it depends a lot on how we are with folks so that they can see the shared collective, ideal future.
And then we'll move on to another question, unless folks have anything else they want to add. I would just add too that I think so often policy, and you all did not do this, but I think so often policy is defined as only legislation or legislative, like a bill or something is policy. And I think it's important to note and to center that policy is also the absence of legislation. Policy is mores and culture and behavior. And because if you have actual legislation, that is a legal thing that is important. It does not mean that culture and beliefs and behavior has changed. And so what I think you are all saying here is what that takes is civic will, movement building, and people seeing themselves in that process, which is really about what social design is about, and why your roles as kind of the carriers of that, and to help hold up a mirror so people can see themselves, to work through this movement building that again can lead to policy change, however that word is being defined. But it's purely it's not just legislative, and I think that's such an important framework for folks to know. Okay, a next question we have is, I'm just going to read it straight how it is. I would like to hear about everyone's process, specifically about the deep dive into their own assumptions and biases, especially since all of these projects pertain to racial, gender, sexual orientation, inclusivity, to ensure that the change begins within and not just in the communities we work with. Yes. Okay. So has there been, or was there a personal shift or personal assessment that needed to happen, or that you went through as part of this process, and examining your own biases, your own personal narratives as they came up in your work?
I can start. That's an amazing question. And I think for me, a lot of the work that I already was doing was around what does anti-racism look like? What does anti-Blackness look like? And so again, this question of communities, like I was already, or I am a part of other communities with other folks who look like me and share identity with me, where we were having these conversations, right? So when I partnered with my school, it wasn't the first time that I was thinking about this question. And I had a group of people that I was in dialogue with, other educators, people I grew up with, kind of examining like, and a lot of this project was talking to other Dominican folks about race and identity, which is a conversation that we don't always have in public, right? And we didn't have access to as like folks who went to different types of schooling. And so, yeah, that was something I had to keep being in question about. And so I was really lucky to partner with my teacher at Wheels, who was also first-gen Dominican kid who grew up in that neighborhood and went to school at the institution. And so a lot of that was us taking time, going on lunch breaks, like just like spending downtime together and building that relationship and having our own conversations about what it was like to grow up in our own Dominican families and what it was like to enter these school systems that did not reflect us. And so we were having all these conversations, readings, like just having our own learning outside of like what we were going to bring into the co-design space of it. And I think that's something that, again, there's no template or like framework worksheet to do. It's sort of like reading and being in conversation and inquiry with yourself and with other people, because again, it's not something you can do alone. And when you talk to other people, and this was kind of the reoccurring theme throughout this project, it's like the experiences that I have were also being echoed by someone else, right? Because we were growing up under these same or similar conditions. And so we talked a lot about like the ways that we were similar in our experiences, but the ways that we were different, right? And so I had access to a lot of like white, wealthy schooling. And that was something that really informed the way that I showed up in thinking about public schools. And, yeah, like just noting that like lived experience also, because we share an identity doesn't mean we're the same. And because I was talking to a group of middle schoolers who were mostly Dominican, that they didn't all have the same experiences, right? Because of racism and colorism and housing segregation, all of these things. And so, yeah, I think a lot of work and that it continues, right? Like as I was learning and sharing and being like, I heard this, what did you hear? And so that like process of sharing those insights and getting validation or being like, oh, it's a little bit off. That wasn't exactly what I heard. And really working together through that. Cause I'm a student at this. And so learning with my teacher partner, but also the young people and being like, nah, miss, that wasn't it. And I'm like, okay, well, let's try that again. But I'll pass it if anyone has other things to add.
I can jump in. Just kind of tagging along with that, I think this brings up for me a lot about the issues of intersectionality and privilege, and kind of where we see our own privilege when we come into a space, and really acknowledging that up front, even when we are in a community of people who look like us or who have similar experiences to us, that we all have different levels of privilege, and that that intersectionality is really important. I know for me, a lot of the workshops that I was working on, I'd be in a group of all Black Americans, so similar experience to me, but we had a lot of folks from the LGBTQ community, a lot of people who, were from very different socioeconomic backgrounds, just like all of these different layers of things that can add to a shared experience, but can also mean that like the assumption of a shared experience isn't always accurate. And so I think especially in navigating race, it's really interesting to think about that and how intersectionality kind of plays into the way that we approach this work.
I think that this is a really great question, and there's definitely like been growth, even personal growth, when it comes to recognizing our biases and how they are showing up in our work. And like a personal thing that I remember was that through the duration of our project, an Indian celebrity came out and said, it's okay, if darker people want to look nicer and fair, and they can just put on some powder and it's cool. And we both read about it, and then we had a discussion about it. And after 5 or 10 minutes of discussion, I still felt a lot of anger. Like I was enraged. And after 5 or 10 minutes, Kartik said, okay, now let's stop and let's think about how we can influence people like this to not think this way. Like maybe she just doesn't know better. Maybe she doesn't know what to say. So how can we build our intervention such that it affects people who think like this as well? And I think that was a moment of personal growth for me, to not blame somebody, but recognize our social conditioning and that we've all grown up with it, that we've all been part of it in some way or the other. So, yeah.
Well, we have just a long queue of questions, which I think is testament to how great this panel was, how wonderful the conversation was. There were so many incredible things discussed. We will capture the questions. We'll try to figure out how we can address them. Maybe we will put them up on our website and give, time for you to answer. These are being recorded, so you'll be able to see the panels on our website. And I think we're going to turn to just some quick closing statements from everyone. And then at the end, I'll just wrap up this panel. And so thank you so much.
I'm gonna pick on you. Okay, let's start with Vanessa. Closing thoughts, or like, what's the call to action? What's next? Anything you want to put out there as a final thought?
I think what I want to tell everyone is that it's understanding that low-income immigrant communities don't need any more quick fix solutions. And what they need is an opportunity to recognize their own power and capacity in lifting themselves and also others up.
Okay, I'm gonna choose. Damian, final thoughts.
No. Great, thank you. Yeah, it's been an exciting journey, and I think that you know, this question of healthy masculinity has been, yeah, I think, you know, really bringing up this question around sort of call out culture, as we've gotten the habit, I think, of calling out toxic masculinity, how that call out culture is reinforcing, I think, for a lot of men to not confront their unhealthy masculinity. Calling out brings up men's defenses, and they end up leaning in to a lot of these sort of traditional masculine traits like aggression, and as I was mentioning, defensiveness. And so the healthy masculinity forum is hopefully this place where men can arrive, show up, ask questions, and experience being called in by other men to address their unhealthy masculinity in this ongoing journey that we all as men have.
Awesome. And for me, I think this moment around COVID-19, and I think this was one of the questions that I saw is, and Roz, you started us off with thinking about like who matters in our society, right? And so thinking, you know, if you didn't know that racism and capitalism are destructive and hurting people all around the globe, and our relationship to nature and all of those things, now you know. And so for me, really thinking about access, privilege, where you hold power, where we might need to let go of some of these systems that are not serving us. And so going back to this idea of normal, like let's let that go and really think about ways that we can think about new systems and new structures, because even inclusion into what, like the system that was not working for us, especially as Black and brown folks. And so I think this is an opportunity to imagine and really put into practice the things that we're saying about community, about who matters. And yeah, it can be very exciting and also a little scary, but that's part of the uncertainty and the journey. And so I'll pass it to Aditi and Kartik.
Yeah, I mean, this made me think of something that Karen often says, and it's really stayed with me. She often asks us, how serious are you about the dignity of other people? And I think about it often, and I think that that is what should drive us to do better work, so that the dignity and worth of our future generations doesn't depend on things like their race or their color or their gender. So yeah, this is an ongoing fight, and we have to keep fighting it.
Personally, I mean, at the end of what's been an absolutely incredible journey, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what's to come. I just want to quickly thank everyone at the program, the staff and the students, for making my time at DSI so very special. And on the project front, both Aditi and I, we've both invested a lot of love and labor into this, and we really don't want to stop working on such an important issue right now. And we'll see where we can take this, and we'll continue working on this. Thank you.
Great. Xuan?
So yeah, I just want to go back to Damian a little. So I think so since Damian mentioned about like the culture, that is something that I'm fighting with during this project too. So I think that the thing is, like, if you using those dynamics to disrupt the system, that it needs time to heal and rebuild those systems, this dynamic and system and trust and conversation. So it's, for me, it's after this project, I think it's really important to rebuild that trust and also recognize who is not at the table, who don't have the access to the table. And that is the conversation that we need to happen. It's not just in comics, it's not just in representations work, but it's about all of us.
Sorry, I lost my mute button. Yeah, so I think for me, obviously, story and narrative are super important. And Maya Angelou was quoted as saying that there is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside of you, which is a sentiment that I've found to be true throughout my research in this project and my interaction with my community partners. And once you really get people going by asking the right questions at the right time, they're really often eager to share and connect with each other through story. And so looking forward to helping to create more spaces for that to happen and continuing to co-design with communities and hopefully working with you all again in the future.
Well, Mia, I'll pass it to you. I just want to say that the future is incredibly bright with all of you in it. This is really, really transformational work that you're doing. It is not easy. It's really hard, deep work, but there is incredible joy in it. Yeah. And I can feel that coming from you. And there is this framework of radical optimism, which doesn't mean not doing the hard work. It just means having the belief and the framework that systems can change. That's the radical part. And then doing the work is the work and the joy and the tension, and feeling that burning tension and moving through it. So you are all incredible. It was such an honor to monitor this panel, and congratulations to all of you.
Thank you, Rasmia, Kirmani, Frye. You are amazing, and we are so happy to have you as a part of this panel. I think we need to change the name of the panel to Radical Optimism, or add that. Congratulations to you all. You've made us so proud. You've worked so hard. Your energy is coming through my Zoom, and your work is inspiring, and you can see it in the comments as they've come through. You are extraordinary. So tomorrow we have 2 more panels starting at 10 a.m. with Community, the Building Blocks of System Change, moderated by Sloan Leo, who is our designer in residence. Don't miss that. And then 11:15, it's Accessibility and Information Exchange by the one and only Karen Proctor. So please come. We're also doing a video screening of all of these fantastic videos. You've got to see the details of their work and their process. For those of you who wanted to see how it's done, they are going to show you, you know, the tremendous efforts that they've learned about and their capabilities as social designers. So you are now entering the world. Go quickly, don't wait, don't stop. We need this work more than ever. So thank you everyone for joining. Thank you for supporting Design for Social Innovation, and we will see you tomorrow. Have a great day.
Bye.